Hello everyone, welcome. I'm Kate from Tried and True. Today I'm going to be taking you through the process of cooking a whole chicken in your Instant Pot, stripping down the meat and then using the bones for bone broth, and then what to do with the meat and the bone broth after you're all done. This is a process I've done many times, and so I have some tips and tricks to save time and to save you from making a mess. So first we're going to cook our chicken. I have my Instant Pot here, and I have my chicken all ready to go. Make sure that you have removed anything from the chicken, such as twine or bands to hold the legs and anything from inside the chicken. The first thing you're going to do is add some water to your chicken, to the Instant Pot. I add about a cup of water. Now, some people would say this isn't necessary because there's enough water in the chicken, but I like to make sure. The worst thing is when you finish what you think you've done is cooked your chicken and it's not actually done or it hasn't come up to pressure. So I always like to be sure. Now today I have a little bit of a smaller whole chicken, so I'm going to cook it for 25 minutes. With a larger chicken I might do 30 just to make sure. Again, the worst thing is to open up the Instant Pot, see your chicken isn't cooked and you need it for dinner or for another meal. Alright, so next I'm going to put my chicken, just plop it right into the Instant Pot, super simple. Okay, and then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to season it just a little bit. Since I'm making bone broth, I don't want it to have too much seasoning. So I'm going to add a little bit of everything blend, and this is from the Balanced Bites seasoning blends from Diane Sanfilippo. You can actually purchase these on her website, or you can make them yourself, which is what I do. I have her book, Practical Paleo, and there are so many great seasoning blends in that book. One of my favorites is the Everything blend, which has turmeric in it, which gives it its yellowish-orange color. I also like the Diner blend and the Italian seasoning blend. So I'm just going to dust my chicken with some of the seasoning, and that's it. And now I'll put the lid on, and I'll make sure to close the pressure seal. So there's venting and sealing. I'm going to make sure I turn it towards the back so that it's on sealing. All right, and since it's ready to cook, I'm going to press poultry. And then I'm going to move the time up to 30 minutes. Actually, 25. 25 since it's a smaller chicken. Normally I would do 30. The great thing about the Instant Pot is, and for cooking for that amount of time, is at 25 to 30 minutes, I'm positive that my chicken is going to be completely done through, and it's not going to overcook it, and it's not going to be dry. So the beeping sound just means that it's ready to turn on. First, it's going to come up to temperature and come up to pressure. So that can take anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes depending on the contents inside the Instant Pot. Once it's up to pressure, then you'll see this on go to the countdown for the number of minutes. So we'll switch to 25 and then it'll start to count down. Now the other thing you can do if you're putting a chicken in the Instant Pot is you can include other vegetables such as carrots, onions. You could even put some potatoes in there and all cook together. For 25-30 minutes, that should be plenty of time. And then it'll come out like a slow cooker dinner. Since today I'm mainly doing this for the meat, and to make bone broth, I'm not going to include any vegetables with my chicken today. So that was it. Throw a whole chicken into your Instant Pot, add a cup of water, a little bit of seasoning, and cook it for 25 to 30 minutes depending on the size of the chicken. Alright, well now we're going to let the Instant Pot do its thing, and I'll be back to show you what to do once the Instant Pot is done cooking. Okay, so now we are ready for the next step in the process, and that is to remove the whole chicken from the Instant Pot now that it's finished cooking, strip the meat off, and get ready to make the bone broth. So I've actually waited about 30 minutes after this is done cooking just because I was busy. Normally I would release the pressure right away after it's finished cooking, but I didn't get around to it, so now I'm ready to do that now. So I'm going to move the knob in the back from sealing to venting. And there's no steam coming out because I waited long enough that the pressure has released naturally. Now, when you do turn it, if you turn it right away after it's finished cooking, a lot of steam is going to come out. And if you don't like that getting on your cabinets or you don't like the sound, you can just put a dishcloth over top of the vent. It'll still vent properly and you don't have all the steam coming out. Okay, so let's get the chicken out. to turn this off, so we don't need it warming anymore. We want it to cool down. Okay, so I have a dish that's ready to put my chicken in so it can cool down. You can leave it in the pot to cool down, but it'll cool down a lot faster if you take it out. And I can see my chicken is completely done. It's actually split open, which means it is fully cooked. And it looks nice and tender and juicy. Go. Let's let as much of the water drain off as possible. And then just place the chicken back in your pan so it can start to cool. Now at this point, you do want to wait for the chicken to cool. So you can see it is steaming. Oh, we actually lost the wing. I'm gonna grab that wing out there. It's still steaming. So you're not gonna want to be handling the chicken while it's this hot because it will burn your hands. It will be very hot. So we're gonna let this sit for about 30 minutes before I would peel the meat off and then get the bones ready for the broth. But fortunately, I made another chicken earlier this morning. And I'm gonna put that one over here to cool. So this one I made with everything seasoning. You can see it's a little more yellowy orange in color because of the turmeric. This one I made with the diner blend. And the reason I did different seasonings on them, this one is going to be used for chicken soup. And I love the everything blend with chicken soup. It's really, really tasty. This one I'm going to use for chicken salad. My kids love a chicken salad. They eat it for breakfast, lunch, and they would eat it for dinner if I let them. They really enjoy it. So I think the diner blend goes really well with chicken salad, and then I'll also sprinkle some diner blend into the chicken salad when I make it. So this one has a more reddish color because the diner blend has paprika in it. This is another one of Diane Sanfilippo's Balanced Spice seasonings that I make in bulk on my own, but you can buy them on her website. Okay, so to get started, I have a bowl here to put the chicken meat. And then the easiest way to do it to save dishes is just to take the bones and put them right back into the Instant Pot. So as you're shredding the chicken, the meat goes into a bowl for whatever you're going to use that for, and then the bones go right back into the pot where you're going to cook the bone broth. It saves a step. Also, there's a decent amount of liquid in here. There's about 1.5 inches of liquid. That's great. Leave it in there. It's already halfway through the process of making the bone broth just from the chicken cooking. So that's really good stuff, and you don't want to lose that. And it has all that good seasoning in it as well. I'm not too worried about the two seasonings mixing from this chicken to that one because they both are fantastic seasonings and they go well together. But if you're going to do something like this, it is something you want to think about. Okay, so I'm just going to start shredding the meat. It goes in here, the bones, and the skin will go in straight into the Instant Pot. And I try to get every last shred of meat that I can off of these bones. And as you're shredding meat from the chicken, don't be shy. Just get in there, start ripping the meat off, digging your fingers in. This chicken is not hot anymore. It's still warm, and it has been sitting for about 2 hours. Slightly warm inside, but I probably could have done it about an hour ago, and it would have been fine. But I'm really just digging in there. Again, this is going to be for chicken salad and the other one for chicken soup, so I'm not too concerned about the presentation of the chicken meat. But if you are going to serve this for dinner, which you totally could, you could take this and put this right on the chicken, or right on the kitchen table and serve it for dinner. If that's a concern, then you can use a knife to carve it, take a little more care. But since this is just going to be used in other things, I'm not worried about what the meat looks like. So I'm just ripping it right off of the carcass. So what I'll end up doing for the bone broth is using 2 different chickens to put the bones into the pot, especially with smaller chickens like these. If you only use 1 chicken, you're really not going to have enough bones to make a really great bone broth. So there's a couple things you can do. You can try to find bones from a local farm. They're typically not found in a regular grocery store, but maybe you have a farmer near you, or you can go to a farmer's market and try to find some additional bones to put into your broth. Or you can save up any bones that you have, maybe have a few nights a few times that you have chicken, you save up the bones to where you have bones for 2 to 3 whole chickens. Maybe you have chicken thighs or chicken wings, and you can save the bones from those as well. And of course, you can always mix turkey bones in with your chicken bones as well. Okay, so now we're ready for step 3, making the bone broth. I have shredded both of the chickens that I cooked. The second one wasn't quite cool enough, so I didn't follow my own advice and I burnt my fingertips, but now at least it's ready to go. So all the bones and the skin from the 2 chickens are now in the Instant Pot. And I kept the juices in there from the chicken that I just cooked. This is the point where if you had extra carcass, bones, chicken's feet, neck, anything like that, you would add them into your pot now. So my pot's only about halfway full. So I would prefer to do a full batch, but those are the bones that I have right now. Now if you are saving bones from other dinners, chicken thighs, things like that, you would just throw them in a plastic bag in your freezer. And then you can pull them out, throw them in frozen. When I do have chicken's feet and chicken's necks, I do just keep them in the freezer. And then when it's time to make the broth, I just throw them into the Instant Pot frozen. This is also the time that you could add any vegetable scraps that you have, carrots, leeks, onions, celery, anything like that that you wanted to add. Now, I don't do that. I know a lot of people do, but to me, it's just a lot of extra work. And if I'm gonna have to put extra work into making my bone broth, I'm just not gonna end up doing it because I just don't have the time or the energy to do all that prep work for making bone broth. And I do it so often that I just never get around to putting the vegetables in. I used to do it and it was great, but I actually don't really notice a difference in the taste of the broth. I think it tastes fine without all those extra vegetables. You could also add garlic and some other seasonings. I'm not gonna add too many other seasonings because I already have the seasonings from when I cooked the chicken. Also, because I'm using my bone broth for different things, like soup, and bone broth lattes, I don't want it to be too heavily seasoned, especially with stronger flavors like garlic and onion, because those are going to come through in the other dishes I'm making. I also don't add any additional salt to the broth before I cook it, because again, I want to salt the finished product, such as the soup. And if I'm going to be making a bone broth latte, again, I probably don't want it to be too salty. Okay, so I have my bones. I'm also going to add, this is the reserve liquid from the first chicken that I cooked. You can see it's kind of red because of the paprika and the dino blend. So I'm going to add that back in. And you want your water to just cover the bones, because if you add too much water, then you're gonna get a more liquidy bone broth and you won't have the concentrated collagen. So I'll just add some filtered water until it reaches the tippy top of the last bone that's sticking up there. Perfect. Right now, so I'm going to add some apple cider vinegar. This helps to break down the bones, so you get all the minerals and all the great effects out of the bones. So about 3 tablespoons. Okay, and it does not have to be exact at all, so you don't need to measure. I'm going to add some fresh rosemary that I just picked from my potted rosemary plant over there. I'm going to add 2 3 bay leaves. And I'm just going to add a little bit of dried thyme, but it's dried, but it's not powdered. So it's still like the leaves of the thyme. So if I had fresh thyme, I would use it, but I don't right now. I'm just going to shake a little bit in there again. So I have about 4 sprigs of rosemary, maybe about a tablespoon of thyme, but bone broth is very forgiving, so it does not have to be perfect. And then I'll take a spoon, just push down the seasoning so it gets down into the pot. Okay, and that's it. So the main things to remember: put your bones in, then fill with water or the liquid up to the point where you're covering all of the bones to the top. Don't exceed the fill line. There's a max fill line in here, so it tells you not to go above because 1, it may not come to pressure, and 2, I've done this, and what happens is hot broth starts squirting out of the Instant Pot and coming out of the steam vent. And it probably won't ever come to pressure because it can't get that perfect seal. So you don't want to fill it up too high. Okay, and then we're done. All right, so we'll put the lid back on and turn it. We turn the vent in the back from venting to sealing. So that's closed. And then for bone broth, I'm going to press manual. You can do it for as little as 30 minutes if you'd like, but to get the maximum benefit, I'm going to count backwards. So you go down to 1, 0, and then you'll hit 120. And I know on some of the newer models, you can actually go to 180, so 3 hours of cooking. So either one, but really any amount of time over 30 minutes is great. I'd say at least 60 minutes, but if you could do 2 to 3 hours, that's fantastic. Okay, so then our bone broth will start cooking. It won't take too long to come up to temperature because it's already warm in there from the chicken I just cooked. And it's also pretty full, so it also helps when it's more full for it to seal faster. And then so we'll let that go. I'll let that go for the 2 hours, and then I will release it, and then we'll move on to the next step of how to remove the bone broth from the Instant Pot and take the bones out. Okay, so it's been 2 hours and the bone broth is done. So I'm going to turn it off. And so it stops warming, because as long as that's on, that it'll still keep warming the liquid. And then I'm going to release the vent, and it is going to make some noise because there is a little bit of pressure left. All right, so now the pressure is fully released, and I can open up the Instant Pot, and it looks and smells delicious. All right, so I'm going to pull this pot out. Ooh, it's a bit hot. Just grab a towel. There we go. I can smell that fresh rosemary. That's great. Okay, and actually I'm going to go ahead and put this on the floor just to get it out of the way. Okay, so now we have our bone broth, but of course we want the liquid out, and we want to keep the bones and the skin and the herbs in the pot and take the liquid out. So this is actually what we're going to do. This is what I found to be the easiest way to process the bone broth. The first couple times I ever made bone broth was a complete mess. I had bone broth everywhere, everything was sticky. So this is what I found to be the best way to finish up your bone broth. So I just take a ladle, and what I have here, the tempered glass bowl. I have a large colander. And I put the bowl as close to the pot and the rim as possible so that the drips don't go everywhere all over the counter. And doing it this way is pretty much as mess-free as you can get. So I'm just pulling out the bones, and these chicken bones are just falling apart, which is exactly what you want. Okay, so my colander's almost full with the bones, so I'm going to lift it up and just let the rest of the broth drain out. And then I'll take these bones to the trash. Empty that out. Put the strainer back in. And continue to transfer. Now you can dump straight from the pot into the strainer. The pot is hot, as you saw when I first tried to lift it out. So even using mitts or a towel, it can be difficult to get a good enough grip. And I have actually dumped an entire pot of broth all over the counter once because I didn't have a good grip and it was really hot. So you can either wait for it to cool down a little bit, and then you could pour it directly into the strainer until the strainer be full. The other reason, I guess now that most of the bigger bones are out, that'd be even easier. When there's larger bones in there, they're gonna plop down into the broth, and they could splash or they could fall out onto the counter. So again, I've tried so many different methods and I've made broth so many times, and each time I make a mistake, I learn from it and I find a better way to do it. Okay, so now we're almost down to the bottom. So I'm just gonna, it's actually cooled down enough I can handle the pot. Ooh, there's a bit of bones in there. Okay. strain out the last bit of that beautiful liquid. Okay. All right, so now we can set this aside. And I have my jars ready to transfer the broth straight into the jars. I find it's easiest just to put them in the jars right away so I don't forget and leave the bone broth in the refrigerator too long. The more steps I can get done when I'm actually in the kitchen, the better. Okay, so then I'll use a funnel. This is just a collapsible funnel I got on Amazon. Bring it right next to my broth. And you can use a ladle to put the broth into the jar, or this can be a little bit messier, but it's faster. You can use a measuring cup of any size and pour it in. Now, this is a little bit messier, like I said, because the broth will drip down and it might get outside of the funnel and the jar. So, but if you're in a hurry, it does go a little bit faster. Okay, and I'm gonna leave a little bit of room at the top for two reasons. One is, and then also once if you put the cup down, then you'll get broth on the counters. One more thing to clean up, but it's not as messy as other ways that I've tried to do this. Okay, so I'm leaving a little bit of room at the top of the jar. One is because I'm gonna put this in the refrigerator, and then once it cools, the fat will rise to the top and harden on the surface. I'm gonna remove the fat. The fat can tend to be bitter, so I'm gonna remove that so it's not a part of the broth anymore once it's cool. Then also, once these are cool and I've removed the fat, I can put this jar directly into the freezer. And I wanna leave a little bit of space at the top so when the liquid expands as it's freezing, there'll be enough room for it to expand and it won't crack the jar. Now, putting this into the refrigerator before the freezer is really important for two reasons. One, you do want to clean the fat off of the top of the broth before you put it in the freezer. Trying to get the fat off of frozen broth is very difficult, and then when you go to warm it up, then the fat can go down into the bottom and then it's harder to get out. The second reason is you want it to be completely cold before you put it in the freezer. If you put a hot glass jar into the freezer, it will crack. And yes, I have lost bone broth this way. So I know from experience, I put my hot bone broth directly into the freezer, and then I ended up with 4 cracked jars. So don't do that. So these will go into the refrigerator. I'll clean the fat off tomorrow and then put anything I'm not using right away into the freezer. Okay, so I've put my bone broth into 3 of these jars. They are a little bit full, so I'm gonna see how much fat there is at the top after I take them out, and if I feel like there's too much broth in there and I'm concerned that the jars will crack after expansion, then I'll take, about a 1/3 cup maybe off of each one and place it into a smaller jar. So I'll make, 3 large jars and 1 small jar, but we'll see how much. I can already see a lot of fat rising to the top, so after I remove the fat, it might be okay. All right, so these jars that I'm using, this one in particular is one of my favorites, and I love it for the lid. It has a nice wide plastic lid, and then I got stickers that you can, they're chalk stickers, and I put it on there, and then I can use a chalk marker and put the date and chicken broth on it, and then I can put it in the freezer so I know what it is. And when I wash it, you just kind of rub it before you put it in the dishwasher. It comes off and you can use it again. Okay, and so now we're ready for the final step. My bone broth has been in the refrigerator for over 24 hours, so it's completely cooled. And the fat at the top of the broth has solidified. So I'm just gonna take a spoon and lightly scrape, and you would just throw this right into the trash. No reason to save it. And just scrape all of the fat cap off. And if you get a little bit of broth with it, that's completely fine. And you can even leave a little bit of the fat if you can't get it completely off. And just like I thought, there's about 1 inch left at the top, so it's plenty of room so that the jar doesn't crack. I've written chicken broth with the date on my on the lid here. And now I can go ahead and put this directly into the freezer, just like that if I'd like. You can also break it up into smaller jars to make it easier when you need to use it. Another thing you can do is you can take a muffin tray, and I have my silicone liners in here, and I'm just going to put the broth directly into the liners. And if I fill each one to the top, it's about 1/3. And then I'll put them into my freezer. And once they're frozen, I'll take them out and store them in a freezer bag. And then that way I have 1/3 portions of broth whenever I would need it. Okay, so that's it. Those are the steps we're taking all the way from a whole chicken through to finishing your bone broth. And the next videos I'll be doing will be for making bone broth latte, chicken salad, and chicken soup. So you can look for those on my site.